Al Jazeera Podcasts.
What I felt was just incredible relief that the killing and the maiming of children, that now stops. At the same time, I'm also quite worried and heartbroken because the road ahead will be very, very long.
That's Rosalia Bollen, a communications specialist for UNICEF in Gaza. She's seen a lot. And after more than 15 months of war, she and her team are in the thick of it. At least 46,000 Palestinians have been killed, and 2/3 of all buildings are now damaged or destroyed. A deal for a 3-stage ceasefire was agreed to on January the 15th, but it hasn't been straightforward. I want to know how people are doing right now. I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know. We're dedicated to amplifying women's voices, stories, and topics we're all thinking and talking about. This is a safe space where we go all in, so by the end of each episode, you can say, "Now I know." Rosalia Bollen has experienced a lot firsthand and joins me to talk about the monumental task ahead. So, Rosalia, thank you so much for joining us on Now You Know.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so can you just tell us what your role entails?
I'm working with UNICEF as a communications specialist. I go out into the fields, into the communities every day. I meet with children and their parents, and I highlight their stories, and I also highlight the UNICEF programming that we undertake. UNICEF is active in a very, very broad range of programmatic areas, from things like nutrition, malnutrition, to water engineering, water sanitation and hygiene. During the war, we started to work on family tracing for unaccompanied and separated children. Our estimate is that at least 17,000 children in Gaza have been unaccompanied or separated from their family, so completely on their own.
Can you just tell us where you are right now? Because, you know, we can hear the wind, we can hear some children in the background.
Yeah, I'm talking to you from an area in southwestern Gaza, which is called Al-Mawasi. This is a very beachy, dune-like area with very little infrastructure. And the UNICEF compound here, which isn't a building, is surrounded by improvised tents, makeshift tents. Lots of families who have been displaced. The majority of families in Gaza has been displaced. Lots of them have actually come here to Al-Mawasi. They've put up their tents here. And so the moment I set foot outside of the compound here, it's sand and it's tents as far as my eye can see, as far as my view reaches, really. I see also lots of solid waste, lots of garbage. There's open sewage that actually flows in between where the tents are. So it's an unsanitary environment. It's not an environment for people to live in, really.
And you've been on the ground in Gaza since October 2024. What has it been like for you and the team working with the displaced families, with children?
I mean, for us, it's been extremely hard because of the scale and the depth of suffering of children and families here. There's literally not a single aspect of life where people have some reprieve. The suffering is just endless. It's actually quite cold at the moment in Gaza. Winter has started here. Lots of children I see, they wear summer clothes still. Many children are barefoot. Lots of children tell me they can't sleep at night because it's too cold. One child told me that she couldn't sleep because of the stray dogs outside of the tent, and she was just terrified of the dogs, and she could hear them roaming around and had nightmares of them. So children also haven't had a proper meal for a very long time because of the very low quantity of supplies that entered Gaza during the war. Most families told me they have one, max 2 meals a day. Families mostly eat canned food. Lots of children spend their days queuing in front of soup kitchens in front of bakeries. There are not many that were still operating during the war. So you have hundreds and hundreds of people gathered in front of a single bakery. I saw children who were fighting with each other over a loaf of bread. I saw children fighting with adults. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
That they're not experiencing what a normal child should do.
The thing that I found the most difficult is the children that I met in the hospitals in Gaza, here in the south. What is just heartbreaking is that children there, they're hospitalized after an airstrike, on their homes, or while they were playing outside in the streets, sometimes with very, very severe injuries, very severe burns, spinal injuries, skull injuries. But the care is not available for them. Healthcare has been decimated. Hospitals really struggle to function because of the lack of electricity, because they lack medical supplies. So that their condition worsened because of the lack of care. So you have a 7-year-old child who survives the bombing on her home. Her leg is fractured. She's brought to a hospital, Al Shifa Hospital. That hospital then comes under siege. For 20 days, this girl, is under siege with the hospital staff, with her injuries. Her leg, in the meantime, becomes infected. The doctors don't have anything to disinfect the wound. They don't have anything to stabilize the fracture. And they end up having to amputate the leg of this 7-year-old girl. If you would end up in hospital with a leg fracture anywhere else in the world, most likely the doctors wouldn't have to amputate your leg. I've heard accounts of children being amputated without anesthesia. Children have died not just of the bombs and the bullets, but also because of the deprivation, the lack of food, the lack of warm shelter. There's young infants who have died of hypothermia. Something that I also found very difficult to witness is the absolute state of terror that all the kids here are in. Throughout my time in Gaza, there was always a very ominous buzzing, a very loud buzzing of drones flying over. And that never went away. It's the first thing you hear when you wake up. It would be just so intense that I could even feel like the walls vibrating. It would actually wake me up at night. But what was so heartbreaking is that these children have had to flee their homes. They've had to leave everything behind. They've witnessed all sorts of things no child should ever witness. But they're not given a single moment of reprieve. They know that no place in Gaza was safe. And so not only is there this constant exposure to violence, but there's also this permanent stress, very toxic stress and anxiety that is mixed with the trauma, and that children haven't been able to step back from. So children are deeply, deeply traumatized.
Al-Mawasi, I know it's suffered several attacks by Israeli forces before the ceasefire, so I understand that you've seen the worst of it. But I have to ask, what was it like for them? And what was it like when the ceasefire was announced and came into effect?
When the deal itself was announced, the ceasefire hadn't taken effect yet, but the deal was announced. Children came out en masse. They were out in the streets. They were singing, they were waving, dancing, celebrating. The children I spoke with over the past couple of weeks or so, they were just so filled with hope and with expectations. They've been detailing to me all the things they want to do the moment the ceasefire takes effect, all the things they've been dreaming of. There's some children who haven't seen their siblings for months or even for a year. They've somehow become separated, with one part of the family in the north and one part of the family in the south. There's lots of children who've been speaking about dreaming to sleep in their own bed again, to have the bed for themselves, to be in a warm place in their warm homes, to be in their own bedroom, to be surrounded by their toys. They speak about the toys they loved playing with and that they hope to find once they return.
نروح غزة أنا مبسوطة كتير ونلعب في ألعابي وبدي أروح مدرستي أكتب فيها واشتقت لسيدو كتير مبسوطين إنه في هدنة وإنه أروح على بيوتنا وألعب مع صاحباتي وأروح على المدرسة وأشوف عروستي.
It's in a way, it's quite heartbreaking because driving around Gaza, it's very obvious that the extent of the devastation is very, very important. In some places of Gaza, Khan Yunis is a good example. It's as if there's been a massive earthquake, because some streets are just not a single structure that is still standing. It's just gone. It's sand and rubble.
You said in a press briefing in Geneva last December that there was an average of 65 truckloads of assistance entering Gaza in November 2024, compared to the 500 truckloads daily before the war. We're now seeing long lines of trucks going into Gaza. How much aid is really getting in?
Something that is important to understand in terms of the logistics of our operation is that aid trucks are not allowed to drive straight into Gaza. So UNICEF doesn't have trucks on the Israeli side who, when they get green light, drive into Gaza. We have a modality that is called transshipments. So we have aid that is brought to the crossing points with Gaza. It's either scanned there, controlled there, or it has already been scanned. It depends a bit on the point of entry, the original point of entry of these 8 pallets. And once this aid has been cleared, it is loaded onto Palestinian trucks on the Gaza side.
Right.
So we dispatch Palestinian trucks to the crossings who wait there. Once the aid is cleared, we load that onto the trucks inside Gaza, and then it comes to our warehouses from where we distribute it to families in need. I feel this is an important nuance to highlight, because it's, in terms of sort of logistics, it's something that changes the way that we operate. It makes it less straightforward, obviously, compared to when trucks would be allowed to drive straight into Gaza. But yes, there has been, since the ceasefire has taken effect, there's been a very, very important increase in terms of the aid pallets that have come in. So indeed, in November, there was a daily average of 65 truckloads of aid that were collected. At the beginning of this year, earlier this month, that dropped even further to 45 to 50 trucks of aid collected every day. So really not a lot, just a mere trickle of what is needed here, because the needs are so immense. But on the first day of the ceasefire, we've had over 600 trucks picked up collectively with the humanitarian community. The pallets, they contain things like these nutrition supplies, these high protein energy biscuits for malnourished children. I've seen kits for adolescent girls that contain sanitary pads and underwear, headscarves, blankets. I've seen family dignity kits. Those are kits that contain nappies, soap, wet wipes, detergents. So these items, they're actually not trivial at all. There's a lack of everything here in Gaza. And something like soap, you may think that's not a priority, but it is important because of the unsanitary conditions here. Diseases have been rampant. Chickenpox, hepatitis A, respiratory diseases. Lots of parents told me their kids have diarrhea. So it's very, very important to get these items to the families. And that's what my colleagues are focused on right now.
It sounds like a huge operation. Like, have you experienced any interference from Israeli forces or from Hamas or anybody else?
It is indeed a highly complex operation, and is complex not just because of the scale of the needs, but also because of the multiple constraints that we have here inside Gaza. Those constraints are very, very diverse. Some constraints are tied to the physical environments, the fact that the roads are largely damaged, which makes it harder for the trucks to move from A to B. The fact that there's probably lots of contamination of unexploded ordnance. The fact that some of our own facilities have been damaged, the fact that we haven't been able to bring sufficient supplies in over the course of this war has meant that a problem of scarcity emerged in Gaza. Lots of products from baby formula to shampoo to eggs have become scarce.
Yeah.
They've become very valuable, and it has become very interesting for criminal elements to try to loot that, to hoard it so that prices go up even more, and then to try to sell that. So something that we as humanitarians need to be able to efficiently operate is public order. We need some form of community policing, some form of civilian police, so that we can actually move efficiently from A to B without interference from, in this case, these criminal elements.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is there a black market for aid, and who are these people?
I haven't heard personally any accounts of looting so far. I know that for UNICEF distribution is ongoing, but this was a massive problem throughout the war. Initially, it was families themselves and opportunistic individuals who were trying to get their hands on the aid. That happened fairly quickly, as we weren't able to bring in sufficient supplies, and so families feared for their livelihoods, feared for their lives, really, and they tried to get their hands on aid supplies. But into this war, and especially after the closure of the Rafah crossing, we've seen an important increase in what we would really describe as violent criminal looting that is criminal in nature, that is highly organized. We had our truck drivers threatened, beaten up, injured, some with broken bones. So this was very, very violent, and it was highly organized.
Rosalia, on a personal note, how did you feel when you heard about the ceasefire?
I mean, in the first place, it was an enormous sense of relief. I've been aware of the fact that it's a highly dangerous environment to operate in. In fact, it's one of the most dangerous places for humanitarians to operate in. And just thinking of all the children I've met with, what I felt was just incredible relief that the killing and the maiming of children, that now stops. At the same time, I'm also quite worried and heartbroken because the road ahead will be very, very long. I've seen the scale of devastation. People are very, very hopeful, but especially the children. They're full of expectations. And I think humanitarian aid too can only do that much. Every humanitarian aid pallet coming in right now will be life-saving, will be critical, but ultimately, we need to clear the rubble. We need to restart the schools. We need to reconstruct that infrastructure, and that's just an enormous task that lies ahead of us. And I don't think many people out there have any answers as to what form or shape that will take.
You're out there in the neighborhood with the communities. Where do you start?
The task ahead is absolutely enormous, daunting, and it's not just the physical reconstruction of Gaza. It's also the psychological healing, the recovery process of children. We're looking at the risk, a real risk of a lost generation, if we aren't able to resume learning for these children, if we aren't able to offer them psychosocial support, mental health support, after everything that these children have been through. Right now, the aid that is coming in is physical aid on trucks, certain aid that children need in terms of their protection, in terms of education, is not necessarily material. It's not going to be brought in on trucks per se. As to, for instance, the question of education, there's a few very concrete hurdles. To name a few, the school buildings have been damaged. School buildings are currently largely functioning as shelters. They've been repurposed as shelters. A large number of families lives in makeshift tents, but some families have sought refuge in classrooms. So if we wanted to restart formal education in sort of a concrete stone school building, there's so many things that need to happen first. The return of these families to their homes. We need to refurbish these buildings, and we're not just speaking about a couple of dozen of buildings. We're just speaking about hundreds of buildings across the Gaza Strip. Yeah.
On a slightly more technical note about the ceasefire, there are 3 phases to this ceasefire deal, which was agreed on January the 15th. Now, the first stage is set to last for 42 days. What's your understanding of the deal?
I share the understanding that you have, that this ceasefire consists of 3 phases. The first phase is 42 days long. It involves an immediate halt in military activities on both sides. It involves the gradual withdrawal of the IDF from certain parts of Gaza to a buffer zone, the release of certain civilian hostages, the release of Palestinian prisoners. At one point into this first phase, families here in the south will be allowed to move back to the north. The scale up of humanitarian aid is also part of this first phase. The deal features a clause about aid entering at the level of 600 aid trucks per day. And then if that all holds and we enter a second phase, the second phase presumably would see the reopening of the Rafah crossing, which is the crossing between Egypt and Gaza. And that crossing has always been used for the evacuation of patients as well. So that's something that is really crucial given the state of healthcare in Gaza right now. And then after that second phase, where the prisoner exchange would continue, there'd be a third phase that would focus on the reconstruction of Gaza.
Well, as you just mentioned, the return of the captives in exchange for the Palestinian prisoners have already started during this first stage. Is there a fear that we might not get to the second stage?
In terms of the ceasefire holding or not, that's a great question. The fact that the ceasefire has taken effect is a critical first step. But now, to save children's lives in Gaza, it's vital that ceasefire holds. Whether or not it will, the world will watch both sides very, very closely.
Do people feel like both sides will hold their end of the deal?
So children appear to be very optimistic. When the ceasefire had just taken effect at 11:15 a.m., I immediately went out into the community here in Al-Mawasi. There were a few girls who walked up to me and they asked, "Is the war over? There's no more fighting? The war has ended?" And at first, I wasn't really sure how to answer it. I told them the ceasefire has started. Whether the war is over, whether fighting will resume, that's something nobody knows. I think parents are much more concerned. So children are just very, very happy with the idea that they'll leave the tent and they'll go back home. Some children understand that there is lots of destruction, but they've said even if my house is no longer there, I still want to go there, and then I'll put up my tent on top of my house. I just no longer want to be here on the beach. I just want to go back to Gaza City or Jabalia or wherever it is that they're from. But parents, they share that concern for the future. They're anxious that Gaza may not be reconstructed very fast, and so they fear for the futures of their children, even if the deal does hold. The ceasefire is a critical first step. It's a good beginning, but it doesn't end there. And the people of Gaza, families of Gaza, will continue to require the support of the international community, as the road ahead is just going to be very, very long.
Rosalia Bollen, I appreciate you for just making the time to speak to us on Now You Know. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So now you know what it's like for people in Gaza right now. Thank you to Rosalia Bollen for talking to me, and a special thanks to you for watching and listening to Now You Know.